This is the material that we talked about in class on Monday. I forgot to press the record button. I was going to record that lecture. But so I'll hit some highlights here and run through these slides. On the pretest, we talked about, there was a question about an experiment about eating a live grasshopper. The question went something like this. Let's say that people were asked in the course of this experiment to eat a live grasshopper. Now, some of the people had a very warm, friendly person running the experiment who asked them to do this. And another person had, other people had a kind of rude, cold, aloof person who asked them to do it. And then later they're asked who enjoyed eating the grasshopper. Well, it turns out that the people that had the rude experiment are more likely to report liking it. That seems strange, though, and what explains this result? This is a case of what psychologists have called cognitive dissonance. And the original experiment went something like this by Leon Festinger, who did this work back in the 50s. There were some people who were asked to do something that was, in the course of this study, that was extremely boring. Nobody would enjoy this. They hated it. And then they're asked to go out and tell people that it was an enjoyable thing to do. Okay, now they're paid to essentially tell this lie. So some people are paid $20 and other people are paid $1. Now it turns out that people who were paid $20 did not change their attitude towards the original task. The people who were paid $1, though, did change their attitude. So later, when they're asked, did you like doing that thing that you did, which was the boring task? The $20 group said no, hated it. The $1 group said yes, they enjoyed it. Okay, so this is about cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is this inconsistency that you perceive between your actions and your beliefs. You experience that inconsistency, that dissonance, you makes you feel uncomfortable. So we don't like feeling uncomfortable, so we try to reduce the dissonance. Think about relations between our actions and our beliefs or attitudes. So you can have actions that are irrelevant to your attitudes or beliefs. So the example that I have there is opposing gun control and brushing your teeth. So one has absolutely nothing to do with the other. Your actions and attitudes can be consonant. That means that they support each other. So you oppose gun control, you belong to the NRA, for instance. Or they can be dissonant, which means that they not only do they not support each other, but they conflict with each other. So, example, believing that smoking is bad for you, but you smoke several packs a day. So they can be irrelevant to each other. Which means they don't conflict, but they also don't support. They can be consonant. They support each other. They can be dissonant. They conflict with each other. Okay, again, that dissonance makes us feel uncomfortable, so we need to reduce it. Well, what are the ways that we can reduce our dissonance? You can change the action, you can change the belief, or you can keep both but reduce the level of dissonance by adding other beliefs. Okay, let's say you believe that smoking is bad, has harmful health effects, and you believe, and your action is that you smoke several packs a day. Well, you can either stop smoking, this change the action. You can change the belief, that is, believe, well, the Surgeon General must be wrong about that stuff. So really smoking isn't bad for you. Or you can, the third option here, add beliefs to dilute the dissonance. Well, what you can say is that, yes, smoking does have some harmful side effects, but it also has good good health effects, not side effects, but health effects. For example, you might say, well, being overweight is bad for my health, and if I stop smoking, then I'm going to gain weight, and that's going to cause my blood pressure to go up, and so on. So you can keep this belief that smoking has some harmful health effects, but then you reduce that dissonance by adding other beliefs about the good health effects that it brings. Applications. Okay, the original experiment. Here's the dissonance. I told a lie. Okay, everybody in the group in that experiment went out to the people who were waiting and told them how enjoyable the task was. So they lied. They also believed that they wouldn't lie unless there's a good reason to lie. Now, there's hardly anyone who says that they would never tell a lie. You just have to start with, well, would you lie to save someone's life? Or would you lie to the Nazis about where the Jews are hiding? Things like that. So people, I think almost everyone would say, yes, I would lie under those circumstances. So what people actually believe is they wouldn't lie unless there was a sufficient justification. Sometimes there is a sufficient justification. The $20 people believed that they had a sufficient justification for lying. The problem is that the $1 group did not have. That's called insufficient justification effects. So when the justification you have for doing something seems insufficient to justify the behavior, then you're going to experience that dissonance. Now, this is especially strong when you see the behavior as being freely chosen. Okay, you decided to do this. You weren't forced to. You voluntarily chose to do this. And the behavior has bad consequences. So in this case, these people freely accepted the money, told the lie. The behavior has bad consequences, which that's going to induce these other people to go and do this thing under false terms. And finally, the person sees himself as responsible for these consequences. These people wouldn't do this boring task had I not told them that it was fun. Okay, this happens a lot. Here's some examples. So, first example, students were asked to write an essay arguing for a position that they didn't believe was true. So these were majority race students that were tasked to write an essay on arguing for affirmative action. Okay, half of them were told that this essay was completely voluntary. Okay, that gives them a low incentive to do it. Half of them were told that it was required, gives them a high incentive to do it. Turns out the subjects with the high incentive didn't change their attitudes. They still thought that affirmative action was wrong. But the students that had the low incentive later tended to change their mind about affirmative action and agree with the essay that they wrote. Okay, another example. A study involving nursery school children that were told not to play with a toy that everyone wanted to play with. Half of them threatened with a mild punishment, half of them threatened with a more severe punishment. And then later, when the kids are asked, do you want to play with that toy? Do you like that toy? The severe punishment group said yes, they still like the toy. The mild punishment group said that they didn't like the toy. Okay, they changed their attitude towards the toy. So in both groups, right, the justification that they had for either writing the essay or not playing with the toy was not sufficient enough to make it reasonable for them to either not play with the toy or write the essay. But they did the action anyway. And since they now had an insufficient justification for doing the action, and they did the action, that caused the dissonance. The only way to reduce the dissonance is to change their belief or change their attitude, given that they can't go back and make it such that they hadn't performed the action. Effort, justification, and dissonance. A lot of times we have to justify the effort that we put into something. If you put a whole lot of work into something and it turns out that it just wasn't that valuable a thing to do, then you're going to have some dissonance. Why did I go to all this trouble to do this thing that's not worth doing? Example here is a club with a difficult initiation. Forgive the misspelling there. Well, it must have been worth doing, otherwise I went through all this for nothing. So what people tend to do is change their attitude about being a member of this club or this group. We tend to value the things more when we had to work really hard to get those things, even if those things really aren't as good as we think that they are. Post-decisional dissonance. When you have to make a decision between two things, let's say, what kind of dog am I going to get? Or what job do I take? Well, it turns out that in most decisions, there's hardly ever an option that is just, this is the best in every respect. One option will have certain positive features, but also has certain negative features. Another option will have different positive features, but also different negative features. Before the choice, it seems like it's really hard to make the choice, to decide which one is best. After the choice, what we have a tendency to do is to maximize the positive features of the option we chose and to minimize its negative features. This is called the spreading effect. The spreading effect says that these two options will seem really close together before you make the choice, but then after the choice, we have a tendency to make it seem like it was obvious all along that this was the better choice. So the difference between them seems much greater after we chose. Now, this dissonance is greatest when the choice is difficult to reverse. Okay, the cost is high, and the responsibility for making that choice is on you. An example that I generally use in class is a case of shopping or buying a product. So we like to think of ourselves as smart, savvy shoppers. So we only make good purchases. We don't make foolish purchases. Well, let's say you buy something and it turns out to be one of those foolish purchases. Well, is this, you believe that you're a smart shopper and you bought something that was just a dumb thing to buy? Well, that's going to cause dissonance. Well, this dissonance is going to be bad if those three conditions are met. Now, you can imagine these situations where the dissonance we really wouldn't experience much dissonance. Let's say you buy it from a store that's got a very liberal return policy. So you spent $100 on this thing. It was a stupid thing to buy. What can you do? You can just take it back to the store and get your $100 back. That's what a smart shopper would do, you can tell yourself. Therefore, that's not going to cause the dissonance. Or maybe it's something that you have no idea whether this is going to be good or bad, but it only costs 50 cents. Maybe it's a package of gum. And if you try it, you don't like it, you can just throw it away. Well, that's not going to cause much dissonance because you haven't wasted any money, real money. Or it could be the case that you bought this thing, it was a real stupid purchase, but you bought it on what turned out to be bad advice from somebody that was generally trustworthy. Well, it's not really your fault, right, that you made this bad purchase. It's their fault. You've got somebody else to blame. So when you can't take it back, the cost is high, and you only have yourself to blame, then you're just stuck. I made this foolish purchase. So how do you reduce that dissonance? You've got to convince yourself that it really wasn't a foolish purchase. Then what do? You tell other people how great it was, and then they make this and they blame you for it. Belief disconfirmation in cognitive dissonance. What happens when it turns out that we get lots of evidence that a belief is true? And this is a case where we experience, or belief is false, rather, and we experience dissonance because of this. Festinger investigated a group that believed that the world would end in 1954. They were so committed to this belief and the leader of the group that they gave away all their possessions, they sold their property, they moved in this house together, and they waited for the end of the world. Well, it did not end. We can confidently say in 2020. This produced a great amount of dissonance. Not only did I get rid of all my stuff, but I blindly followed this leader who's obviously wrong, which says something about me, right? Okay, well, what's the result? You would expect them to leave the group, but instead they became even more committed to the group because what they ended up doing was saying, oh, it's not the leader's fault that he was wrong. It's our fault because we weren't sufficiently committed. So it had exactly the opposite effect that one would think it should have. Well, this presents some problems for reasoning, so I'll just post these up here. We'll run through them quickly, and this is the last slide. How does cognitive dissonance affect our reason? Well, it can lead us to distort the other's position or argument or evidence so that we don't have to take it seriously. Especially if it's a case that if it turns out I'm wrong, then it's going to cause some dissonance. I don't want to believe that I was wrong. So I'm going to set up a straw man for the other side. It can shift focus away. We can shift focus away from that argument or evidence so that we don't have to think about it because we don't even want to think about the possibility that we're wrong because, again, it's going to create some cognitive dissonance. Or that was about, both of those were about the evidence for the other side. But the cognitive dissonance can also cause us to unduly overestimate the quality of arguments or evidence for our own side. Again, because being wrong is going to cause cognitive dissonance, and we don't want that. So if we're committed to a false belief, we're going to do everything that we can to pretend that the evidence for our side is greater than the evidence for the other side. Okay, that's it in a nutshell. So hope everybody is staying nice, warm, and safe during the ice storm, and I'll see you next week.